All right, seeing the presence of a quorum, thank you. Seeing the presence of a quorum, I'm calling this meeting of the Amherst School Committee to order at 6:30 p.m. on May 21st, 2024. I am Sarah Marshall. We don't need to take attendance by roll call, but I will ask everyone to introduce themselves just for the benefit of the public. Starting Jennifer down there.
Hi, Jennifer Schau.
Bridget Hines.
Irv Rhodes.
Deb Leonard.
Doug Slaughter.
Interim Superintendent, thank you. Okay, first thing is public comment. There were no written emailed comments. There were no voicemails, and there is nobody in attendance at this meeting at this time, so there is no public comment. Oop, here come some people.
That's Katie.
Oh, I can't see it. Okay, thank you. All right, so,
They're
yeah.
rolling in right on time, actually.
Okay, yes, so
what they need to
public
do.
comment period is closed with no public comment. First, we will review the minutes of our April 23rd meeting. Those have been uploaded to the agenda, and I wonder if anybody has any edits to make. I believe Debbie Westmoreland is watching our live stream, so,
Give me a second. I had some, but
okay,
you said there was an update.
yes.
Do you want me to, oh, I'm sorry, I can put them up on screen, sorry. I need to put those up.
Still can't function with this thing. Sorry. There was an 80-10 that looked like it should be either an 80-20 or a 90-10. Page down. Yeah, down each superintendent's update. Second to last sentence from the bottom.
Yes.
Oh, right.
Should it be 80-20 or 90-10?
I believe it's
Maybe
80-20.
Okay, I guess we can look at the material. Or 80-20, or we can ask
And
80-20, thank you.
And then in the paragraph before, perhaps I'm not understanding the vocabulary, but there's two overages. The under D, the last sentence, also second to last sentence. The overages are well understood, but there are other areas of the budget that have overages that can be moved to support those
Probably underages.
It
or-
would be
not-
underages, or resources is another word I often use in that circumstance. But yeah, it would be underages or resources.
How about, or funds? How about just funds? Make it. All right, we'll ask Debbie to make the appropriate edit. Anything else? All right, can I have a motion to approve the minutes as amended then?
I move to approve the minutes.
Thank you, Irv. Second?
Second.
Deb? All right, thank you. All in favor, raise your hands. All right, the minutes are approved as amended, 5-0. Thank you. All right. Right on time. Our first order of new and continuing business is to hear from Katie Richardson about ELL instructional models and Comandante's update. So, and if you can give your name and your position for the public.
Good evening. Lower that. Okay. My name is Katie Richardson. I'm the Multilingual Education Administrator. Thanks so much for having me tonight. So I'm hoping to give you just a little update on an adjustment we're making to our dual language program model. And so just for a quick explanation that will follow, the 90-10 is an adjustment of the amount of Spanish instruction and the amount of English instruction, and we're looking at just the early grades for this transition. Thanks, Doug. So it's important to just remember that our guiding principles, our pillars, right, like our goals, what are we trying to do with dual language, are these three pillars. So bilingualism and biliteracy, grade level academic achievement, and sociocultural competence. So nothing about that has changed, right? The vision of what we're trying to do for our students is the same, and the adjustment is just how are we getting there, right? So we had a listening session earlier this year with some of our staff, and among the comments in that session were some indications that led us to think, is this a moment to explore a change in the program model? And so from that, we gathered a team of teachers, interventionists, administrators, to kind of consider that more deeply and see, what did we think? So we had 5 meetings with that whole team. We also consulted and had research support from our postdoctoral fellow in the Western Mass Bilingual Hub at UMass, and that's Dr. Patrick Thane, who's here tonight in case we have questions for him. We consulted with the Multi-State Association for Bilingual Ed, as well as other districts who use 80-20 or 90-10 models. And then once we sort of came to an agreement as a team, then we, fleshed out a lot of details, of course, within that, but then we were able to communicate with families and share that information with our rising kindergarten students.
Excuse me for interrupting.
Sure.
I just want to make sure everyone realizes the current model is 50-50, yes?
Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, that's right.
50% of the time in English and yeah.
Exactly. So a big picture, something that we say regardless of the model is that the community, the language of the community is English, right? And so we're always trying to figure out how do we elevate Spanish and how do we provide more opportunity for Spanish within a dual language program when most of the community and the supports we have outside are in English, right? And that's true even for our Spanish home speakers, right? Because they go into the community and most folks are speaking to them in English. So that's part of the thinking about, why this can be valuable. So to try to be really clear in the change here, we're looking at starting with this just in kindergarten next year. So that chart that shows the red in Spanish and the blue in English will roll out 1 year at a time, right? So there's no change to students who are already in the program. And I think that's important because, we want to make sure that families have the information ahead of enrolling and that there's, they understand the opportunity. So we've decided to change that 1 year at a time. And what we're looking at is essentially all of our subjects would be taught in Spanish to begin with a 10% English that would include, or that would mostly focus on really that English language arts time. So there's an opportunity for students to learn, connect, engage with some text, have some oral language, right, in English. And really we know that, again, all the time, but even more so within this model, we want to make sure that we're talking with children about the social emotional aspects of being in school, dealing with challenges, things like that, right? So that will always be tucked in both languages. We'll provide opportunities for building connections across languages. And so that's something that happens naturally when more of the instruction is in Spanish. We won't do that in terms of like full units yet, which we do as we get to 50-50. But children are always making those connections. So we're always trying to foster their ability to look at the differences and bridge their learning between the languages. And then specials as well will happen in English. In terms of the English learner model, so there'll be targeted support from our English learner educators during that ELA time, as well as during the PLT, the personalized learning time, depending on the student's needs and their level. We have an opportunity, because we have bilingual ELL teachers, they can really look holistically at our students' language development across languages and help us to unpack what do children need and what makes the most sense. In general, we still always try for inclusion as much as possible across our ELL program, and that would continue here within our kindergarten English learners for next year. I think we're ready, yeah. So in this model, one big shift is that children learn to read in Spanish first. And it says learning to read in Spanish is actually easier. That's because there aren't as many tricky rules, right? It's it's a more straightforward association between the letters and syllables and the sounds that they make. So it's something that we see children pick up pretty quickly. Then, of course, we need to help them transfer and make those explicit connections. So second grade is where that starts to happen in a more formalized way. But throughout all of that time, we'll continue with our regular assessment and progress monitoring in both languages so that we can keep an eye on what is happening with the language development and reading development and know where we need to intervene. Good. And so this is the crux of it. Why did we land here? So for all students, it builds a stronger foundation in those early grades so that as we continue into the content, there's, we're, again, think about those pillars, right? We're aiming for that bilingualism and biliteracy and increasing proficiency in both languages. So that sets the tone that we can continue to do that. And, a little plug, as you know, we're looking towards a long-term vision, right? That we hope that children can have an experience of bilingual education through the elementary and eventually through secondary. And we want to make sure that we're starting off strong with that. We've been really pleased with the outcomes, honestly, in 50-50 in terms of what children are achieving in both languages. We do see, as is typical for language learners, we see that speaking and writing skills are a little bit lower than listening and reading skills, right? And so we're hoping that with a little more time to develop the language, that we'll be able to boost that aspect of the productive language. There's also both from our teachers' observations and in the literature, again, we've made a lot of strides in increasing the amount of Spanish that we use in here in school. But we still know that children, regardless of what language they speak at home, will eventually move to preferring English. And so the more we can do to say, you learn to read, you learn to engage with text early, that's fun and interesting, right, in Spanish means that that's something that stays more kind of balanced as they move into the older grades. Another big benefit that I think our teaching team is really excited about is that we will have more time because right now we need to teach phonics and foundational reading skills in both languages. If we're able to focus more, we can go deeper and have more time for practice within one language. We can also have more time for things like centers and, just deeper engagement with the content and language. I think, again, like our teachers are doing a phenomenal job right now in the 50-50, but that's one of those tension points is there's never enough time. And so it opens that up a little bit more for them. It's really important to know that when we think about this, we wouldn't do this if this didn't make sense for all kids, right? So there's rationale that it really makes sense for our Spanish speakers because we see that if we can continue their cognitive development, right, they may already speak Spanish, but if we can bridge that into school for longer and build a really solid foundation, that benefits them. And we see that students can exit earlier from ELL programs in this model, which is fascinating, right? Mm-hmm. It seems, at the surface level, seems counterintuitive that more Spanish would lead to quicker acquisition of English, but there's actually research that shows that. And I think for me as an ELL educator, I can say that the closest parallel I've seen for that is that when we have students coming in as newcomers in the upper grades in the secondary schools, our students who come in as strong readers and students who have had lots of learning experiences and cognitive development in their home language, right, when they come to us, bridge that gap much quicker to learn English. So it's interesting and I think parallels in a sense what could be happening for our younger learners too. So we really center what our Spanish speakers need throughout our process. We feel like it will additionally be beneficial to all students, including our English speakers, because they'll also get that more of a foundation early on. But still, we know within a 90-10, when we say 50-50, it's hard to really have that be 50-50 because a lot of the language that's used between children and throughout the day is English, right? When we say 90-10, we know that that's true too, right? So we're really pushing to try to increase as much as possible within the context of an English community, right? English-speaking community that we want to kind of elevate that aspect of it. So I think that's, is there one more? Go ahead. So a few points from the research. So as I mentioned, there's the piece about seeing that English learners are reclassified faster in 90-10 programs as compared with 50-50 programs. Naturally, we see higher achievement levels in Spanish language and literacy for students in 90-10. And the third bullet around English home speakers. So this is true in 50-50 programs as well, but this research is specifically around 90-10. There can be a temporary lag in the reading and writing development in the early grades because they're getting more Spanish reading and writing skills. But the research shows anywhere between 3rd and 5th grade in terms of their English language arts test scores. So all of those were encouraging, factors. There's a link which hopefully is active for you all if you're interested that has a lot more research and answers to questions that come up in the field, thanks to our Dr. Thane at UMass who's compiled that, and it's a great resource for us. So I think that's all I have for you. And I'll do my best to answer whatever questions you all have on your mind.
Thank you. Are there questions? Start with Jennifer and then Deb.
Hi, Katie. Thanks.
Sure.
So just to clarify, currently every cohort, every grade does 50-50.
Correct.
Okay. And the goal is ultimately for KN1 to be 90-10, grade 2 to be 80-20, and then 50-50 for 3, 4, and 5?
Correct.
Okay, cool. So what will be the impact to the teaching models, the teaching model or of the program?
So right now we have 2 teachers working with each class, right? In the grades where we move to 90-10 or 80-20, they'll have 1 classroom teacher. And depending on the skills and licenses of that teacher may teach the English language arts component, and or an ELL teacher may teach that block. But essentially the children will be with 1 teacher for the whole day as opposed to switching in the middle of the day.
Right. So does that mean fewer staff?
It doesn't, because right now we have group A with 1 teacher,
Sure.
group B with the other, and then
Okay.
they swap. So
Okay. Ultimately, when it's implemented in full, will that mean fewer staff than what we currently have?
it'll be exactly
About
the same.
Okay.
Yeah. It means that we need to continue to have more Spanish-speaking
Sure,
staff,
yeah.
of course, but the numbers will be the same.
Deb.
Then it's building on that, so the current teacher who's in the English classroom, has that person employed within the district?
So whenever this happens at any grade level, that person, if they're on contract with us, always will be guaranteed a position, and we'll look to figure out whether there's someone that could stay in that position if they do speak Spanish, or whether they would need to move to another position. So that's something that the leadership team is working with. And we've had all of those folks, luckily, on the team discussing this, right? So they're all thinking about it too. But essentially, because it's a new position, we have to post it as a new position.
Yeah.
And then that staff member, depending on their skills, could apply or not.
So follow up?
Yes.
So then we would be hiring a second or third kindergarten Spanish-speaking teacher.
So we will have 2 Spanish classes and 1 English class for the explorers, right?
Okay.
So it's the same number of teachers.
Same number of teachers, okay.
Yeah.
It's just if
Different.
the current English language teacher isn't fluent in Spanish,
Got it.
that teacher might move to a different position. Yeah. Will this necessitate a lot of curriculum rewrite? Because I know that has been a big effort every year to introduce, because we've heard that it isn't as simple as just translating the English language, whatever, into Spanish. So
Right.
presumably there's going to be a lot of work to develop the additional 40 or 30% of curriculum now into Spanish.
So
Is that-
yes and no. We don't need to get anything new. What we can really do is go deeper with what we have for the most part. There's some content units that are currently written in English that we'll have to look at adapting, and some of that can be translation, some of it will need to be using different texts. But we have, even since the beginning, we've been purchasing texts in both languages, so we already have a pretty good collection, especially in the younger grades. So I don't feel, there'll be some work for sure to make sure that our curriculum is ready, right? But for example, in the Spanish language arts, we already have more resources than we have the time to use well. So I think we'll be just digging deeper into what we have.
All right. And I'll ask and then seek more questions from committee members. I assume you've talked to families. Are they requesting this? And if not, are they okay with it, or are they concerned about the kids who are not getting so much English, not acquiring English as rapidly? Although counterintuitively, as you point out, this is completely baffling to me. But anyway, are
It is, it's
families
very
on board with
interesting.
this? Do they, yeah?
Yeah, so the biggest telltale, I think, is in the enrollment. We've had meetings with families and explained all of the research and talked through, what was the team's rationale, and we have recently done the lottery. Our enrollment is completely full on the English side with a wait list. Spanish is similar to what's been typical each year, so we're about 3/4 full on the Spanish side.
Meaning the home language, when you say the Spanish side?
Yeah, sorry.
The home language. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, any other? Bridget,
I think my question may have been partly answered by what Sarah asked, but it just seems to me that on both sides there could be concerns for kindergarten parents that that some of the research you're talking about may work against, but like you imagine sending your 5-year-old to school and they're having a kindergarten moment, and how well are they being understood, etc.
Yeah.
So on the, for people, especially, I think one of the strengths of the program is there's a lot of socioeconomic diversity, there's some cultural diversity is strong. So do you think that families will still opt in the same way? It sounds like your numbers are good. That's why I think the question was answered. And then on the other side, I know from working with parents who are Spanish speakers at home that sometimes they have hesitation about a program that's predominantly in their home language because they really want their kids to learn English fast. So I was just wondering how you were going to work with those tensions that are there.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and all those tensions are real for sure. We really worked hard to have a lot of communication, right, and a lot of opportunities for families to connect if they had any questions. And we went through even a simulation in the info sessions of, what does immersion feel like, and talked about that, and what are the strategies that we use as educators to support students through that, both in terms of teaching strategies, but also social emotional learning, right? So we talked with families a lot about that, right? To say, that could feel a little scary, but really it's not that different than what we experience now, which is that our 5-year-old friends who come in and are feeling nervous already, right? And so luckily our counselors, our teaching team, our paraeducators in kindergarten, they're all very skilled at working with that and knowing that, there's a transition time as students get comfortable, so.
Yeah, and it's at the age when you're starting out in kindergarten where people are going to learn the language quicker. So I do think that's, from the English speaking side of things, another thing on the positive side. But I just think about, kids that age and could see where people might have hesitation.
Absolutely, and I have spoken with Spanish-speaking families as well who ask the question, right? They say, well, wait, I want to make sure my children are learning English. And so we go through and explain, the goal is still 50-50, right? But we want to make sure that we're getting that strength in the lower grades to continue. And so, that has, of course, as I've talked about this more and more with our team, right? We know that every opportunity isn't for every kid or family, right? And we've been really explicit with folks about here's what we think are the strengths, and every family decides for themselves. But we've had, I think, worked through most of those issues in conversation with them, and really shared that we want to have an ongoing partnership around any things that come up. So.
And just one more quick question, if
Sure.
I can. What about kids with social communication issues? How does the second language learning affect kids in that situation? Because I know that's also the same age you might see a lot of kids getting diagnosed.
Yes. So I think it's important that we're, as we do already, right? But it's even more so. We're doing a lot of assessment, progress monitoring, collaboration with different members of our educational team to see what is coming up for our children. So we certainly know both from experience and research that these programs can be accessible to anybody. but it's about it's about each individual kid and what they need. So our students that, you know, may end up with speech and language services or an IEP, it's really a case by case to work with their team to figure out within this model what's going to be most effective in moving them towards the educational goals that their family is choosing for them. So.
Good question. I appreciate this program a lot. My granddaughter's in it.
Oh, nice.
And they are in a bilingual family. The father is Spanish only, but the wife speaks Spanish. She learned it over the years. And the issue was the kids in the house. And they wanted to strengthen the kids' ability. So the granddaughter comes here to speak Spanish. And that is then translated into more Spanish being spoken in the household to reinforce that. And from everything that I've seen, the program is an immense success with our grandchild, and how she comes to school, loves being here, and is a joy to watch. I mean, all of our kids are bilingual, some of them are trilingual, and so it's great that this is happening.
Thank you. It's great to hear. And I think something that we hear from a lot of families is that children sometimes who are in Spanish-speaking households, but, have been to even just preschool in English, then are reticent to use their Spanish, right? So coming into the program, then they feel like they can reconnect with that and they build it. So that's great to hear.
Before we move on, hold on. I just want Doug to confirm, this is not a new curriculum. We don't have to vote anything. This is just an alteration in the
That's
current
correct.
program. Yes, thank you. I want to move to a discussion of ELL more broadly, but you have,
Just
something quick?
a couple quick questions. Maybe one's not so quick. Obviously, there was a reason to choose 50-50 in the first place. So if you could give us a little bit of a sense of the rationale. I mean, I understand the rationale for switching, but why that decision was made. And then data is always really nice to have. And so I understand, a lot of the benefits that you spoke to, but if there's some data you could show us that we could just kind of put in the Calmanantes folder, that would be helpful. And in particular, I would be interested in how longitudinally we look at this program as we make this transition between 50-50 at those two grades and the cohort that's gone through already. Thank you.
So that is a long question.
Sorry.
But I'll do my best. So the 50-50 piece, I mean, I think I'm trying to reach back in my brain to kind of what was, what we were thinking about at the time. I think that honestly, it is safer. Like,
In what sense?
like when a community is going to take on a dual language program, it just feels a little bit more like, okay, this is manageable. We know that there's going to be half and half. It doesn't feel as scary as a new thing, right? So in talking to other districts, I've seen other districts that have gone through a similar thing where they do this for a couple of years and then they go, maybe we need a little bit more Spanish, and to boost it. But it's when I read the guidance about from different folks that support dual language programs, often there isn't a lot of benefit additional on the 50-50 side. It's really like it's just a little bit more palatable as a change in a educational
Sounds
structure.
fair.
Does that? Yeah, exactly. So I think that's really the biggest. I mean, I know we also were looking at MSAN districts at the time, and I think more of them had 50-50 than 80-20 or 90-10. I'm not sure if that's still the case. But I think that was mostly it, was just kind of feeling like it was where we could start. Okay. And honestly, some of my colleagues who have been working in the program have been advocating for this for many years. So they're excited. Yeah.
Okay. I'd like to, I wonder if you could speak more broadly to the ELL, aside putting Cominantes to the side for the moment, and good luck with that. That sounds great. Can you describe the ELL program in the elementary schools? So for the English language learners, either who don't wish to or can't be in Cominantes, or they don't speak Spanish or English. So what is done to increase their English fluency in reading and writing throughout elementary school?
So that's could be a whole nother huge presentation, but I'll give you the short answer, and you let me know if you want more later. So we're actually in the process of a DESE review on this, so we've been writing up all of this in lots of detail.
Maybe you could send it to us when you're done.
We could, yeah, absolutely. So we're in this stage where we do a self-assessment and we write up everything we're doing, and then sort of look at that. And next year they visit with us more. So, okay. So how are English learners taught? So essentially, ESL can fall under what's called a sheltered English immersion program, an SEI program, or a dual language program. So we have both. Right, we were just talking about Caminantes, which obviously is the dual language, but all of our other English learners, which is more than are in dual language, right, are served through an SEI model. So what that looks like, there's sort of recommended amount of time based on their proficiency level. Our teachers work, again, it's very, I could say like generally our students that are more, so we have a 1 to 6 scale with the assessment is the WIDA scale. Students that are 1 and 2 typically get more intensive instruction and more often pull out, or a combination in those beginning levels. And then for our intermediates, we try to do as much in the classroom as we can. So that looks like often our ELL teachers are co-teaching some aspect of reading, writing, and or content. Let's see, I would say for beginners, we're looking at usually an hour and a half-ish of services. It could be more, but that's sort of
Per what?
per day, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. It could be more. It could be 2.5, or it could be a little bit less, depending on their particular needs. But yeah, we're doing really explicit literacy instruction. Our English learner team has been working on structured literacy for multilingual learners. So how do we teach those foundational skills in ways that are appropriate for multilingual brains? And they've been doing fantastic work with that, which is really exciting. And then they're looking at, the oral language, the vocabulary, all of that through the content.
Can you describe how, I believe there's a different kind of assessment given to those students, not MCAS strictly, but access? Or can you explain for how long there's, I don't know if it would be called an accommodation, but kind of a separate assessment, and when they are they assumed now to be fluent in English and not needing a different kind of assessment?
So the state assessment for English learners is called Access for ELLs. They will take that until they exit the program. The WIDA scale is a 1.0 to a 6.0, and students exit when they reach 4.2 overall and 3.9 in literacy. The state's target for that is their frame, I guess is a fair way to say it, is 6 years. But they acknowledge that some students get there faster, some are slower, and that's all normal, right? But that's when they progress monitor us and they see if our Ls are quote unquote making progress according to the state, that's the timeline that they're looking at to assess that. I think that was the question, right?
Thank you.
Okay.
Yes. Anyone else have questions about? Deb?
Quick comment, no question. Just my kiddo mentioned how nice it was in the classroom that she's in, that one of the ELL students has a
Interpreter?
classmate. No, they have an interpreter, but they have
Oh.
a classmate who also speaks the home language, and how nice that is for everyone in that class. So I'm looking forward to that getting up through all the grades.
Nice. That's great. Yeah. Yeah, that's one thing I didn't mention, but we do, for our beginners, we do try to provide an interpreter to help them access content while they're in those beginning stages of learning language. So we do have some support in that way.
Thank you.
There's a lot more I could say about the whole
Well,
ELL
that's
bundle,
fine.
so you have to let me know if you want
Yes.
more details on that. But
No, I think
Yeah.
unless anyone else has question, we'll leave it there. And thank you,
Okay.
thank you both. Thank you for
Yeah.
coming.
thanks so much.
Thank you for giving us this update.
I realize I didn't answer your data question.
I thought that
But
was
is it more
eventually-
long-term? Okay.
Yeah. Can you
Perfect.
at some point just send me some
Yes.
numbers to look at? Thank you.
We're very interested in that, and especially that longitudinal piece, and I hope that our colleagues at the Western Mass Bilingual Hub will help us set up some good longitudinal data structures,
Yeah.
because that's something that I always want more information and don't quite have the tools. I mean, of course, I have the basic tools, but when you really want to try to compare apples to apples as opposed to apples to oranges, that's the technical level of, data analysis that we need help with.
I would say if you really have a lottery, I mean truly random, then you have a control group. You have perfect statistical.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yes, it's the only truly
Right.
objective way to do it.
Right. Okay.
And there is a lot.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah. So it's in
Okay.
our minds. Thank you.
Great. All right. Moving on, curriculum implementation plans next year and beyond. And I'll just preface this while Doug gets ready to present it, that we heard about the piloting of some new ELA programs last time, and Jennifer asked, do we need to vote on this? And then I thought about it and asked Doug, and he says no, and he's now going to explain why no. Why we don't need to, why it's not a new curriculum,
Right, so I think that,
plus
so,
some other updates.
so what I put in the packet for you this evening, and we took a fair amount of what was in, I worked with Mary Kyle on this, a fair amount of what was in her presentation last time, but there were, I don't know that we talked on the topics of social studies and science as much, so we had a little bit more there. Just talked about the sort of arc of work for her department over the coming years and sort of implementation strategy. And so some of it's about, just the workload and the capacity of staff to take on new things and to integrate those, fully and deeply into their work. And, there's a fair amount on this chart because the pandemic didn't help us any as far as, continuing to progress. So, curriculum's one of those things that you want to come back to and review and investigate and be in a process of continual improvement on, and we really hadn't had an opportunity to for a couple of years. So we're feeling a bit behind in some respects. And I think that, specifically to the question around let me get the name right, the Think SRSD writing instructional approach, it's a pedagogy. It's a way to, and it's a technique that you utilize as opposed to curriculum, which may have components of that, but then more often have actual, content and materials that are specific to delivering content in an ordered way, in a specific sequence, et cetera, et cetera. This is really an opportunity to leverage this tool or this instructional approach, and you can actually use it across a variety of curriculum. So while you may explicitly use it in working on writing as a literacy component, you can also, if you're working on science, you can use this instructional approach to help your science work as well. So it's kind of, I wouldn't say it's wholly independent of content, but it is much more about ways to approach, which is different than a curriculum. On the other hand, we are doing curriculum work, and specifically some investigation and pilot work in curriculum in literacy. The thing with literacy, it's so math is much more sort of contained. I don't want to say focus, but more defined or straightforward structure and approach. And so the different curricula are about what do you cover in which time frame and what goes first and what comes second, and it's foundational and you build on that and those kind of things. And so we're using iReady for that. It's easier to find curricula that have that sort of holistic full package. iReady is definitely aligned with state standards, and so there's lots of debate among educators. There's lots of input into the state standards and the core, core curriculum kind of things across the state and across the nation. But but there's still debate about, well, should you teach this in this point or this at this point? There's ongoing kind of conversations about that and continuing, development of those things in mathematics and in all subjects. In sixth grade, we use Desmos, which is what we also use in the secondary level, so it's a nice transition there. And so in the current year, we're in our second year of the iReady implementation. That's a full curricular implementation, and then of course next year we'll be in our third year. And there's still some support we give to staff around, the things they need to teach it well and to get proficient in using that methodology and those tools and that sort of thing. On the literacy side, again, sort of a whole spectrum of things. There's, so there's reading, and then there's writing, and there's speaking and listening, and all those pieces are part and parcel of the process of being literate. And so it's a little harder to find curriculums that really sort of encapsulate everything as fully as we'd like. And so there are, and we have in the past had, different pieces for different aspects of it. And I think that, that could occur again as we look at this. Right now, we're doing an initial pilot of a thing called Magnetic Foundations in the K-2 range. And so the idea is it's a structured program. It's still being developed as we speak. They're very responsive to the feedback from us and others as they do that. And we'll continue to pilot that next year as well. I think, part of that is about, sort of capacity of people to, fully integrate their, because you realize that these classroom teachers are teaching math and literacy and social studies and science. They're teaching all the subjects, and so to take on new things and integrate that fully in their classroom is a pretty big ask. And so to take a more moderated approach to how much new curriculum to take them through or to try out is what we're looking at here. And so we'll continue to pilot with a few more folks next year in Magnetic Foundations in the K-2. There's some other tools. Again, speaking of sort of tools, there's a thing called the Ready Reading Toolbox, and again, it's a complementary piece of I believe it's software, but tools that are available to folks and are at their at the level of utilization that they choose to. So as they investigate this and feel like these things work or don't work, or in what circumstances they work, they have a lot of access and control over the use of that toolbox. The Magnetic Foundations, on the other hand, is a true curriculum and is a direction we're heading. At the same time, and as we look into next year, we'll continue to expand the pilot of that. We'll potentially start looking at literacy curriculum in upper grades. Let me see if I can find that. And then obviously, this line here, which is sort of a critical one, it's sort of hidden in there a little bit. It says, continue to review other potential core literacy curriculum options. So even though we're going to have a second year of piloting that Magnetic Foundations curriculum, we're still on the lookout for things that could be good or fit, our community and our expectations, and to explore that as well. But as we go through next year, and this is why I put this in bold, it's likely, kind of this time next year, we might be looking for you guys to do a formal approval of curriculum at that point. And that would be for that K-2. We won't be quite ready for the upper grades to do that. And that's that's part of why that's highlighted, because that's sort of an action step for you guys to take.
Right.
I think the other things that we'll point out here is the SRSD, we're going to do kind of a soft rollout. So we'll do the training. We are in the process of training right now, all of the staff in the elementary grades with that tool. And then that implementation is really going to take place over 2 years. So we're not compelling everybody to immediately adopt it this coming year. We want as many as we can to do that. At the same time, we want building leaders and their staff to work together on what's the right rollout for their building and their folks. But in the following year, in 25, 26, we do expect everybody to be leveraging that tool across the district, so we get a common approach to this. Really think, I think the feedback I've heard, sort of third hand, because I talked to Mary Kiley and Stephanie Joyce, and then they talked to all the teachers firsthand. I think people that have been using that and even to some extent the Magnetic Foundations have a lot of positive things to say about it and are pretty encouraged by it. So anyway, so that's the sort of math and ELA over the next couple of years. Let me go back to the top of this and talk about social studies and science. We've outlined here sort of in the the past year and sort of where we are with regard to the different pieces of software that not software, excuse me, of curriculum that we use in science and social studies. They are an area of need. We are doing some looking into in particular into social studies. We haven't looked at that in a while, and so what you'll notice here is that as we get into next year, 24, 25, there's a curriculum that the state developed actually called Investigating History that we're gonna make available and have folks lean into a little bit. Again, a very much an opt-in circumstance, not a directive from us, but it is a curriculum that like I said, the state developed and provides opportunity for teachers to pick and choose some things that fit with what they do. And again, we're in that process of trying to create a sort of frame around this. The state's also doing this investigative work as well as far as social studies and curriculum and trying to think about how to support schools as they think about and try to integrate social studies curriculum in the schools. There's been a big project more at the secondary level around civics, and there's some of that going on as well. So I think we're trying to sort of align ourselves with the direction the state's going in this regard. And so there's not a lot in those sort of last two columns, but at the same time we're keeping an eye on that. We're looking into those resources that are available. And obviously, if in the area of like social studies or in science, either one, or as we got a fair amount of support in mathematics from the state. There were grants available to help us implement, and that really made a difference for us as being able to afford to buy those resources and dig into that and do the training with people. That's one of the areas where you need real financial support, is to train staff and to then support them as they start to implement curricula. And obviously, if there's opportunities in social studies and science for the state to provide those same sorts of supports, we'll be looking for those as well. Certainly, they're like I said, in the process with that investigating history, curriculum that they're developing, and we're going to lean into it, not in a directive way as much, but offers a resource and promote and support teachers that want to leverage this. As that matures a little bit, we'll see how that plays in our district, and whether we go to a more full and in-depth curriculum adoption process with that. So I think I'll stop there and see if people have questions, and hopefully I can answer them if you have them.
This is super helpful, have all this in one place. Any questions? I'll start with Bridget.
Okay, so that's a lot at once, but it is really neat to see the curriculum map. So my first question is sort of a simple one, like right now, are people just sort of doing their own thing with social studies, or is there a curriculum in place because it's blank for 2022, 23, 24?
I think there's a fair amount of folks that are. I want to be careful about how I answer this because I want to be thoughtful about it. I think there's a lot of, opportunity for people to choose things that are of interest to them. I think there are and have been, initiatives and programming and thought around a social studies curriculum in the district over time. So I think some of it may depend on how long you've taught in the district and who you've worked with as mentors as to some of the shape and form of what you do. Do we have, a formal curriculum like an iReady? I would say no, we don't. I think that's one of the things that staff would say too, is like, boy, we'd really like that kind of frame and guidance in this area as well. We've done some stuff, we got some great things, we really like to do these things with our kids in this grade level and that grade level. But, an overarching, frame would be considered helpful, I think. And I think the state's also looking at that statewide and saying, wow, there's a lot of places that really don't have something. That's part of why they're investigating history as a curriculum too.
Yeah, so, anyone
Deb.
else? Deb.
The part where you said there might be an opportunity to review a curriculum spring of 2025 or adopt a curriculum, is that the magnetic foundations that we're piloting right now, or the combination of magnetic foundations with a other parts that,
So I think it'll depend on, so, sort of that line above it that says continue to review other potential core literacy. So
Yeah.
if there is something, I mean, at the moment, if we were sort of making bets, it's magnetic foundations, right?
Right.
But because we've worked with a year, people are finding it, sort of meets the kinds of needs we have, and it's positive. That being said, there may be something that surfaces, during the course of this coming year that may be better. And I think that, so I didn't want to presume the outcome
Right.
in advance. But the idea being is, in some respects, relative to that, sort of action step by you guys, would be, presuming we've had an appropriate ability to vet and work with it in a way that's meaningful to say, yeah, we have confidence that this is the right next step for us. But there could be something else that surfaces that's really fantastic that sort of supersedes that. I just don't know.
Bridget, yeah?
Thanks. So I think my question ties into what Deb is saying, like, what type of way are we taking, like, the baselines for the students who are moving into these curriculum and, like, measuring across to see if what we're doing is effective or not in our district? Because our district has sort of a unique makeup, I think, compared to some others that might be in the large data sets or whatever like that. So I'm just wondering, how do we determine whether this is something that we find effective as opposed to just like teachers being, yeah, it's great?
Yeah, I think that, one of the key components for anything, and I think you heard more about this with iReady, so I'll lean into that a little bit more. I don't know Magnetic Foundations nearly the same way as we've heard about iReady, but with most of these curricula, they have sort of beginning of year, middle of year, end of year assessments that are part and parcel of that. So that assessment process, and then the ability to sort of see growth within that, and so those are critical, mechanisms and metrics that we look at. So mechanisms to evaluate its effectiveness, and then measures of progress that we're caring about a lot. And so there's the experiential part for teachers. But it can be very anecdotal, and we don't want to rely exclusively on that. And we have ways to measure that. And obviously, in K-2, we don't have MCAS scores. But we do have other assessments that we use and have used and will continue to use that are separate from any curriculum that can provide us some feedback on that as well. So I think there's a variety of ways we look at it. And I will also say that Mary, Kylie, and Stephanie Joyce would be able to give a much better answer to that question. But I do know that one of the pieces for us, and this is it again, to sort of not to eliminate teacher judgment. That's not the intention here, but also to the thing you do with common assessments is have the ability to compare an individual child's sort of performance and growth and that sort of thing, but then also look more systemically at classroom, grade level, district-wide, those kinds of things, and sort of tease out different views to the data and strengths and weaknesses of particular curricula, and where do we need to augment because the curriculum doesn't cover it as well as we'd like, those kind of things. So that's some of what we look at too. It's like, all right, well, this is pretty good for 80% of what we would do, and then what do we do with that other 20%? How best do we reach that piece? Because it seems like this curricula, and that's also feedback we can give to the companies, but we're definitely looking at those kind of things and getting a sense of how the curriculum works, how the kids are performing relative to that.
I would think that the MCAS, which starts in grade 3, right, must reflect how well.
Yeah, there's no doubt that it's helpful. I mean, MCAS is a tricky metric. I mean, it can be a good tool in some ways, and it's not in other ways. It's it's a single data point, and I think it works best on larger scale. So it works best at the state level. It works well at district level.
Or small.
You start to get to maybe even school level. You start to get to classroom level. It gets really difficult, and it's much more individualized. But it does give good comparison information. But you want to put it in context of other things you do, which is part of why we do other assessments, and why, if we're looking at other curriculum, we want to be thoughtful about how we assess and what that assessment means and tells us about progress.
I just have one more.
I just want to make sure if Jennifer Irv has anything. Nope. Okay, Bridget?
Yeah, thanks. And so the last thing was about math. I think sort of you're speaking to it, like some of the critiques on iReady is just too much screen time and maybe not as good with abstract thinkers who like some like math in motion stuff. So, but you were saying you've got a process where you're doing continuous improvement and sort of measuring the curriculum.
Right,
What
and
they're bringing and don't.
Yeah, and I think that that's, when we talk about sort of things we're doing with teaching staff in sort of years 2 and years 3, it's thinking about, all right, how do we understand the ways we use this curricula? And so how do we think about those tools that are electronic or not? It's got components that are on, sort of online and others and tools that aren't. It's like, all right, are we finding the right balance there? That's some about how the teacher leverages the tools and leverages the curriculum. So I think those are things, that I'm hopeful we're looking at carefully and thinking about and getting an understanding of what works best. And it probably depends a little bit on from kid to kid and when to lean in for some kids into this electronic one and when to pull back from that. But I think that those are definitely things around the ongoing training we do with staff and then also the feedback we get from staff about what they like or don't like or what they think works or doesn't work that we're wanting to understand and then propagate as new teachers come to the district and say, all right, here's some good things, here's some things you got to keep an eye on, et cetera, et cetera.
All right, last question. Go ahead.
So I'm interested in, obviously, for the math curriculum, 6th grade uses a different curriculum than K through 5, but it looks like the ELA curricula are K6. So with the move to the middle school in mind and maybe a different educational model? I mean, can you tell me a little bit about how those 3 pieces fit together?
Yeah, and I'm not 100% certain whether the, like, for example, magnetic foundations, a lot of elementary curricula are now K5 as the structure, so I don't know, and I can't remember.
It says K6.
Does it say K6? So
Yeah.
they may be planning on a 6th grade. And I think the thing there would be obviously shifting, the 6th grade to the middle school. If we feel this curriculum is a strong curriculum for 6th graders, then how we teach it and how we shape that is going to be, to fit into how we structure the time. And so currently with our 6th graders, even within the buildings we have now, we kind of have, sort of math, science by one teacher, English, social studies by another teacher. So they tend to specialize a little bit towards subject, not exclusively, not entirely, but in that sort of pre-middle school team subject-specific teacher mode, they kind of head in that direction a little bit in 6th grade. So I think that's part of the evaluation here. So that's likely to continue even with 6th grade at the middle school. It won't be the full-blown team model, I don't think. I mean, we'll see. But it will still have, the sort of look and feel of what we do now in 6th grade. It'll just be in a different place. And so I think if this curriculum fits well and works well, we'll use it. And if it doesn't, then I think we'll be looking for something else to fit that and maybe tie into the 7th grade sort of programming.
So I actually misspoke. It's the Think RSD is K6, and there's a 6-8 model for magnetic foundation. So
Yeah.
that's not particularly relevant.
All right, thank you. Let's move on then. So back to the 6th grade move. I just wanted to create some more time here for discussing what Doug brought forward because we kind of saw it at the last minute last month, and it's a very important subject. So I put it back on the agenda, and Doug has also updated the timeline. So
Yeah,
now
so-
and now it runs vertically and it fits
Right.
on a page.
Right. So one big thing is I pivoted it.
Yeah.
It's fonts again fairly small still. Sorry. Well, mostly because I wanted to fit on one page. Because when it stretches across 2, then it gets a little awkward to kind of keep track of what's what. But I did modify this a little bit, partly based on our conversation last time about having really, the fall of 26 be the target for entry into the middle school. So I tried to sort of stretch this out a little bit and think a little bit about how this plays out. So let's start with, now, which is May and June of 24. And so one of the conversations I had a couple of weeks ago with our district instructional leadership team, DILT, which is basically principals and assistant principals and some central office administrators. The idea being that that's a core group of folks and a broad enough group of folks to think deeply about some bigger and more longitudinal sort of problems and questions and things that we need to do. So this being one of those, there's we've got another one that we're looking into is, of course, moving from 3 buildings to 2. At the secondary level, we've talked a lot about budget, thinking about how to envision that sort of secondary moving forward and trying to think about that structure both from a sort of financial standpoint as well as other standpoints. So we're trying to begin those processes and thinking about those larger projects, for lack of a term, and structuring, what are the pieces of work we need to do, kind of framing out what it is we need to try to attempt. So that's really, in a session this week and probably another one in the beginning of June, we'll take that group of folks and try to articulate, in this case, 6th grade move, make sure we've got all the pieces that we need to think about, try to think about how we want it to, sort of approach and structure, working through the pieces of that. The fortunate thing with this is, we've kind of gone through this once before, so this might not be as big a lift as we did last time, but we got to review all that stuff, and it's a different time. So that's a little different than what I expressed before, which is about this sort of, a bit more of a visioning step first to kind of think about and think about how we approach the problem. And then, the superintendent comes on board in July, and so, we'll share out this project and the others as to far as where we are progress-wise. Then we begin sort of really kind of chipping away at the more detailed aspects of the work. And so most of the rest of that first column of implementation is very similar to what it was before, thinking about, a transition committee that starts a little earlier than the last one, but goes through, a lot of those questions about administrative models and core educational knowledge and, et cetera, and a special ed one as well.
Excuse me, is the transition team different from DILT?
Yes.
So there is not yet a transition team?
Correct. So when we did this last time, they pulled a group together, and there's probably a couple of administrators. There's probably a central office administrator, maybe 1 or 2 building administrators, some teaching staff, some special ed staff. That sort of form this group of individuals to kind of think through from a lot of different lenses, sort of what's necessary and needed. So we'll do something parallel. I think that that original group was a pretty good structure for kind of going through and reviewing the broad spectrum of things that need to happen and begin the work there. I think there parallel to that was a special education specific sort of group that did the same thing. So both of those are parallel to what we did in the past, but are not yet formed. And of course, the superintendent may come in and look at what we do over the next few weeks and decide to go a slightly different direction altogether. So this chart is going to likely change in a lot of ways. Some things don't change, like when we have to move. We will have to, in the column on transportation, we are going to have to review how we do our transportation, the impacts on transportation, because 6th graders don't come to the middle school right now. So there's a little bit of change there, and how do we think about that? And some of that's, that kind of thing is very much a business office accounting kind of problem, not exclusively. There are some actual other problems than things that people want to think about, but there's actually a financial question in there as well. And as we look at some of those other things like food service, that's a fairly straightforward one. Again, that's as much an accounting problem as it is. It's not as much a food service, like literally food for kids problem, but it is certainly one that has a financial component, because we have to keep things that are Amherst district separate from things that are regional district. We get into things like the infrastructure, where we think about physical space, library, furniture, those kinds of things. Those are all things we just the mechanics of going through that and thinking about what we have, what we need, what might need to move from one place to another. And then, of course, as we get into the far right column, which is things that have to do with interacting with the state, and I really kind of just touched on that broadly. There's some some contact we need to do to say, all right, what are the pieces we need to do, what are the steps we need to take formally with you guys, and maybe even with through the state to the federal government around grants and and that sort of thing to consider the school, the school as a school, or what other options that might exist there. And that's again, has some financial components to it, also has some state reporting aspects to it, that sort of thing. So this is a lot of what you saw before, except sort of pivoted. Some updating relative to some thinking I did in the last couple of days about sort of timeline and structure and when we want to kind of chip away at these things, and as we work through it, we'll get more detail and put more pieces to the process in place as we go through. But this also, we have more time, and so we have an opportunity to kind of think about some of these aspects a little more deeply and a little more extensively than we might otherwise, and so that'll help us. And we have a few other projects of similar size and scope, and so this gives us opportunity to weave those together where we need to weave them together, and time to look at all of those with some thoughtfulness and care.
Yeah, thank you. Questions? Jennifer?
So first, I have a request about how we talk about this move, which is that we've been talking about this as moving sixth grade to the middle school for like several years now. And now that we've established that sixth graders are going to be attending elementary school at the middle school building, if we could find a different way to talk about it, because when we just say sixth grading is moving to the middle school, we couldn't blame anyone for thinking sixth graders are going to be enrolled at the middle school, which is not the case. So I've been saying it as sixth graders are going to be moving to the middle school building to differentiate between enrolled in the middle school, or we could say sixth grade moving to a sixth grade academy in the middle school building. But I just want to start that now so that when this happens, people won't still be surprised that sixth graders are not going to be enrolled in the middle school. So that's my first comment. So like for agenda topics and whenever we talk about it, I think we need to train ourselves to do that. All right, so my questions are, Doug, you're saying admins meet to review previous planning and outline, and you mentioned DILT. Is that elementary admins only, or does that include regional admins?
There'll be a need for, in thinking about this, because it impacts the regional school building. It's likely we might have middle school or high school administrator that has some thoughts about how that works, and understanding those models of the building are helpful and essential to that. Whether we absolutely do in this first couple of sessions may or may not work out that way. I'd like to have some of that perspective, but there may be enough knowledge from the elementary folks about the middle school teaming model and that sort of stuff that it's not essential. This first two sort of boxes are really about setting the frame of work and brainstorming about things we need to make sure to consider that we may not have had a chance to, or that we want to dig back into. But I'm not opposed to having middle school folks or high school folks that are aware of what happens as we kids transition into that, be a part of it.
Okay, and so then my same question was for the transition committee. Will that include regional members or admins?
That's probably less likely.
Okay.
It may, though, as we think about, so one of the questions that comes up a lot, and I don't know the answers to, is like, well, how much shared staff can we have, right? So one of the critical things is like, is there some, economy of staffing that we can have where people, because a lot of the licenses are 5.8 or 5.12 or K8, as far as licensure and coverage and that sort of thing. And we think about, sort of specialized areas of either special education or subject matter, that have those sort of, grade levels that span across two districts. So can we share staff across those districts? So as we think about that a little bit and we think through the staffing models, I think we'll probably be wise to have some of those different points of view as far as thinking about that. So, my expectation would be there'd be some, and if they aren't explicitly on the committee, then they're going to want to pull those people in periodically. I think
Great. So I have a continue and a few follow-ups. One of the reasons I ask is because I know like the issue of bathrooms is a big deal, and I don't think has been determined or solved. So I just would ask you to pass that on to the admin team, that's going to be something that I think that they'll want to get input from the middle school staff and admins about.
I will say that there's enough folks, I mean, this is only a year or so ago that we looked at this, and so I think that is a question that is on people's minds, and they've thought about it, and some of it was about public feedback, and some of it's about internal kind of questions that come up. So I think, that is, and there are other areas. That's one that sort of was very clearly publicly discussed about the concerns around that. So I think there's, that's sort of on people's minds, and that gets into questions of like infrastructure too, right? So like, can we physically make alterations that make some sense, or can we do things with schedule and space that are less dependent upon physical changes to the building, that kind of thing. So those are definitely in the mix.
Okay. Sorry, I have two more things. Regarding transportation, has it been established if sixth graders are going to follow the time schedule of the middle school and high school, or if they're going to follow the time schedule of the start time of the elementary school? Because if they're going to have the same start time as the middle school, high school, transportation maybe isn't going to be that as big a deal as opposed to. I don't know. You haven't mentioned it. Has that been determined, or is that one of the things the admin team is going to discuss?
I think most likely the schedule for the sixth grade would be on the same time frame as the seventh and eighth graders, because they're all in the building, and it makes sense. They'd ride the bus together, that kind of thing. So, but from a transportation standpoint, it's like, just like with the restrooms, was a question of, comfort or discomfort of people with younger kids on a bus with older kids.
Yeah.
There are different, opinions about how big a deal that is or not, and how people feel about that. The other thing that I think about relative to that is regional schools get transportation reimbursement. Elementary schools do not. And so we have to be making sure that is accounted for properly, and the billing between districts around transportation accounts for all of that. So some of that's, like I say, some of that is sort of business office accounting stuff that's in there, but it's still important, and it may be, it may have impact on our actual contracts that we have with our busing vendors, because we have a mixed system where we do some of our own busing. Typically, our busing is such that the buses are owned by Amherst, the drivers work for the region. There's a rationale behind that, and then we also have a third-party contractor that does some of our transportation, and we're also providing transportation in Leverett and Shrewsbury Elementary, and we build them separately. So there's a whole complex thing. If you're wondering why my phone's buzzing, it's because my mother's calling me, which is interesting. I doubt she's watching us on TV, but anyway, that's the side. So there's a few different pieces to our transportation there that are kind of glossed over with a single line, so I don't want to be too minimal with that. But
Okay, thank you. Sorry, one more thing in the category of things that are more complex than maybe I had originally thought was, and that my next thing is the library, which, wow, that seems like it could also be complex, because I assume that there's a wide range of books that students can read based on based on their grade, and that are sixth graders going to have their own library, and if so, are some books going to get pulled from and then you have fourth and fifth graders who are I don't know. It just I'm babbling a little bit, but are sixth graders going to have access to the middle school library? If so, are they going to be missing out on some elementary books? And it sounds complicated.
So I think the thing I would say is this: from a physical space standpoint, it's likely we have a good-sized library in the middle school, which can accommodate materials that would be suitable for sixth grade. Some of the materials that are there now would be suitable for sixth grades, depending on where kids are. And we also, thinking about a new building, we're going to take two buildings with two libraries, and they will, we'll need to merge those libraries together. Think about new materials there, but also which of those materials, again, there's some fifth graders that read sixth grade material and sixth graders that read third grade material, all of that sort of stuff. So as we think through that, in thinking about three buildings going to two and merging the libraries, and what's the right number of books and the whole spectrum of that. Similar sort of exercise for the middle school, I think, and potentially adding volumes and sections and materials that might not be there now, but might be helpful for sixth graders in that space.
Gotcha. Thank you. I'm done.
Deb.
So by fall of 2026, we will have our first cohort of sixth graders who have come through the Caminantes program.
Correct.
TBD.
Yeah, and thoughts around that?
I don't have any answers to that. I have lots of thoughts about that.
Yeah.
So I think that that's, and I think that's going to be something that as we think about, that dual language program and where it goes once we get to that level, that grade level, we have to consider the other members of a regional district as we try to potentially extend that into the secondary level. We think about how that programming fits into what we do at the middle school building with sixth grade. So yeah, I think that's a big unknown at the moment as to what's the right approach to take relative to that, and how to not undermine a program we have and continue to support it and support all the kids and find the right balance between all those different sort of things.
So not to hit a sore subject, but obviously with our budgeting problem that we have at the region, it really impacts world language at the actual 7th and 8th at middle school, and then staffing around world language at the 6th grade academy, how those two pieces fit together.
Yes.
Thank you.
Bridget?
So, the other question that came to my mind, and it might be in the chart, I haven't read every word, but what we called aesthetics. When my son was at Fort River, art, music, tech, and then of course, maybe not language. And so I just want to know, I'd just love to see that as part of the discussion. I think those are both important, but also to sort of flip back to the logistics and budget pieces. Those will probably play in there. And then the second thing I wanted to say was that I think we'll want to see budget projections early and often, because we've got transport, admin, maybe extra teachers to do all that coverage, and and then the question around language. And so I think it's going to be costly, and maybe more costly than predicted, since a lot of stuff we won't be sharing.
Yeah, I think that's a critical question. Is to there's ways where there might be some efficiencies, right? So school nurse, or some special education, maybe some of the sort of specials or aesthetics kind of things. And then there's other areas where we may have more expense. So we may, the administration piece that we have to have that's distinct may be more involved. So we got to think about that. So that's where administrative model comes in. I think to the question around, as you said, aesthetics. When I have on here core educational model, it's not just math, science, social studies, and English. It's really all of the academics that are to be considered, and inclusive of what other opportunities and augmentative things we want to do, and how to fit that within the other. I think I have on here lease agreement as its own column. We will need some sort of lease agreement with the region. Finding the right terms, metrics, and size of that is going to be a piece as well in it, and we'll have a significant financial. I don't think that the region's going to charge $5 million a year, but at the same time, it's not $0 a year. So there's finding the right balance of a lease agreement that makes some sense for both the region and the Amherst schools as they sort of share space and meet requirements of state law around those kind of things too.
Irv?
This is really, I like this timeline. One of the things that I would like to suggest in this timeline that be added are decision points for the school committee. At what point in parts of this timeline will we be required to make a decision? So that I would like to see that. But otherwise, I love the timeline because it gives me a visualization of what it is going to take to make this happen.
Yeah, I think I only put one in there, which is right near the bottom, which is like in December, I think, of 25, where you vote to implement the plan. But I'm sure there are there are probably some other places where that'll be the case. And there'll be also, I think, important to put in here as this sort of matures a little bit, is other decision points that maybe the superintendent makes on recommendation from committees or supporting groups as they put this together, that they'll want to bring back to you. So even if you don't technically have to make a yay or nay vote on something, you'll want those sort of litmus tests across the arc of work to be up to date on where it is, and is it progressing in a timely way? Is it moving in a direction you think? And I think there's some places where we suggest some sort of
Transportation contracts. that kind
yeah,
of
there's
thing.
that. That'll be something that'll probably come back. Maybe I pulled it out, the language that we had, but there was, what was it? If I can find it. No, I think I pulled it out. We had some language in there before, in the sort of, previous version that talked a little bit about, gathering and reviewing feedback from stakeholders. So we've done some of that work. We'll go back to that stakeholder work. Again, that's going to be a pretty critical piece for a school committee to be involved in aspects of that. Some of the stakeholders are internal ones with staff and that sort of thing. And then there's other times when we're going to talk to the community and get some feedback, and what they told us a year or so ago may be different than what they tell us in a couple of years. So again, that'll be another place for the school committee to be sort of host for that, and also listening and providing direction to the district about where we go with that information.
Okay, I have a bunch of things I want to say. First is to Jennifer's point about let's not give the impression that the sixth graders are going to be part of the middle school education program. And maybe we should just call it the academy. I also want to be sure that, we're talking about how we're going to move from 3 schools to 2. And yes, we will have 2 elementary school buildings, but we will be educating elementary students in 3 schools, 3 locations, one of them that just happens to be a middle school. So I want to be careful of sounding like 6th grade is like lost. It's not part of our program anymore. It most definitely is. We're going to operate elementary education in 3 locations. A couple things. I heard some others say aspects of what I wanted to add, more columns, but you can't add everything. But I agree that this outreach, the stakeholder communication, that's its own plan. Maybe it doesn't need to be a column right here. But I do think budget, and maybe you can combine budget and lease, or financial impacts, because those are significant, and we know, because of our annual budget process, when those decisions are being made and those budgets are being drafted. And I think that ought to be laid out here too, so we can be ready to feed the information about the 6th grade academy into the budget process. All right, and the sooner we can, is there any reason why we can't know for sure from DESE, I guess, what building administrators, like full-time building administrators, are needed for a 6th grade academy? Or do we already know? Do we need a full-time principal and assistant principal? And, do we know what staffing is required separately from the teaching staff?
I think they've given us some input on that a little bit, and this topic came up. I had reached out to the state around the question of the regional agreement and talking about this, and they've reached back out to me to say, hey, what's next? So they're ready to engage on that. It's really a matter of time of sort of plugging in and asking those questions. There's a lot of it that's very, formally defined, so it'll be pretty straightforward. You have to have this, and this. Assistant principal is not required by any stretch. Whether or not somebody could be part administrator, part something else. Those are questions that are a little more subtle that we might have to tease out with them and talk through what's acceptable or that sort of thing as far as, there's official sort of titles and such that have to be held. But I don't know that they're going to, require us to necessarily have 1.0 FTE for principal. They may. I don't know.
So it sounds like it's both defined and open to negotiation.
Well, I think, I think the short answer is I don't know for sure.
didn't. Okay.
And I think there are aspects that are probably pretty clearly defined, others that have more flexibility, or there may be an opportunity for flexibility, which, again, when we think about sort of shared staffing, the more flexibility, the easier it gets for us from
Right.
a financial standpoint.
Right.
But the state may be very prescriptive in certain areas, and so we'll sort of navigate those with them. But it is an area that I need to reach out to them
Yeah.
and kind of start to plumb those questions.
Right, right. Okay, and then this random thought came into my mind. Do you know, in the earlier iterations, all the talking about moving the sixth grade, so in the academy, still in the elementary model, what if there are snow days in the regional schools? Because there's ice in Shutesbury, but the elementary schools are open. Has there been any thought as to, do sixth graders go to the middle school all by themselves and have school?
So we've had this happen actually with, we've had the circumstance where, usually not for weather purposes, but for other purposes, we've had to close a building and not the other buildings. So I think it was a couple years ago, Wildwood had to close a day, and the other two schools didn't. And so they had to go another day of school. So that would be what would happen in that circumstance, is that
So sixth
your
grade would
district
not
doesn't have
go.
to finish on the same day, but your schools have to have 180 school days. And so, we've had the circumstance where, because we had to close a building for some other reason, we've had a school building have to be one more day than the others.
That's the case this year, I remember.
Yeah, it's
seeing, I
Pelham,
think.
so they're technically
Oh,
different,
okay.
but same idea, same idea.
So I'm inferring that if the regional schools are closed, the sixth graders would have a snow day.
Yeah,
And
'cause
they
it's-
then they would have an extra day of school.
Yeah, yeah. So the decision would be, driven around, pardon the pun, but the transportation question. And so if for some reason, we were canceling the regional schools because of, sort of transportation relative to weather, sixth grade would be included in that because they're physically in the same location. And so the safety of transportation would be, paramount there. Given that they're starting later now, it's more likely the other way around, but that would be true if the K-5, let me be careful in my language here too, if the K-5 or pre-K to 5 were to cancel or have a late start, but the regional schools start on time, the sixth grade would start on time. And so, you can have it kind of work either way.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, it's messy, but it's doable.
Okay. Deb.
Doug, you talked about the things that DESI needs to weigh in. Were you talking in general, or were you talking specifically about the administrative structure of the academy?
So there's
Well, that's what I asked.
probably a little bit of both. I mean, there are some aspects of, what defines a school and what's required to be in a school. And there are also things like, for example, each school has a unique identifier with the state. So, for example, Fort River is 0008, 0020. The first four is the district, which is Amherst is 0008. Interestingly, in other things that you look up on the state, it's just 008. I don't know why there's one extra zero at the beginning of this, but anyway, the region is 0605 for the district, and then 0405 and 0505 for the two schools. So getting those kind of numbers defined for the school, whereas Summit Academy is 0605, 1001. Sorry, I know, I don't mean to. They've just been locked in over the years. That's it's hard-won information, so I'm proud of knowing it, I guess. I don't know. So things like that. So getting those kind of things defined. I think that, and I just don't know the answer to this, when we talk about things like some of our entitlement grants like Title I or IDEA, I think the schools are listed, so does that get listed distinctly, et cetera, et cetera? So some of that meshing of detail. And mostly that's, for you guys, is sort of transparent, but for us as administrative people, we have to kind of know those things and work through DESI to make sure we've got it right.
I guess it's just a simpler question. I understand there's a lot of intricate logistical parts, but are there parts of this that we need DESI approval for?
Perhaps. So I think in regard to like the lease agreement, we'll probably have to run that
Yeah.
by DESI just because of its interplay with the regional district.
Right.
They like to be kept apprised of all sorts of things like this. And that's again part of the conversation with them to say, well, what are the formal steps we need to do? You know, some of it's pretty straightforward. There's literally like a 1 or 2 page form to open a new school building.
Okay.
It's more than that, but I mean, there's literally one of those. The first piece is something as simple as that form where you're like, what's the name of the school and what's the address? And, you know, a few simple things like that. So I think there are places where we'll probably have to get some blessing from the state. Mostly it's about acknowledgement, and so that they're aware of this thing happening. And so when we go to get like an official number for the school that's distinct from the other numbers for the other schools, they're aware, updating them on the changing grades because the grades that you have at the building. So Crocker Farm is a pre-K to 6 building currently. Fort River is a K to 5, K to 6 building. When we change the grade levels in the building, they want to know that. But it's more notification.
Okay.
There may be a few formal steps that we have to get, a green light from the commissioner or something like that. But
Anything more? This is great. Why don't we take a 5-minute break? Okay? And then come back. Thank you. So we are recessed for 5 minutes.
reached out and said, here's some dates.
Yeah.
I answered back, but haven't heard anything.
Yeah, me neither. I checked in again today.
All right,
just to-
Amherst Media, are we ready?
Okay, sorry.
Are you ready? We're ready.
They all died.
Thank you. Okay. All right, so we can move on to item D, preschool tuition scale.
So formally, you guys get to adopt this. We would normally come to you earlier in the year, but we didn't get the opportunity. So unfortunately, we're seeing it now. It is information that we have been sharing with families that are looking to be in the preschool. So I think what I advised Elizabeth Burns, our administrator for the preschool program, to say to people is like, it won't be any higher than this. But I think that the approach we've taken here is the same one we've taken over time, and I'll bring this up a little bit. This is seemingly a very complex chart, and in some ways it is. And I'll try to explain part of why it looks like it does. So part of the reason we use, so let me back up just a moment here. So our preschool program is supported by state funding and has pretty significant supports for our kids that have special education needs, but we also have some peer students that come in and participate in this, and we're allowed to charge some tuition to help offset some of our costs. When you look at early childhood education in Massachusetts, they use the state median income as a metric for a variety of different things that they do, other tuition programs in other places. So that's part of why we use SMI. So if you see SMI on the left-hand side of this chart, it's really state median income is what that stands for. And it's actually, for us, that actually raises, that's a high number relative to what the median income in our town is. And so what that does is it provides more people with a discount from full tuition, is one way to think about that. So that's one piece of it. Part of why we break it down in the way we've broken it down is it parallels the way the state does with some of their programming around, up to 25% of the state median income and 26 to 35. It seems like a lot of little categories here, but that's, that kind of parallels the way the state does it. This chart's also a little tricky to read because it's in two parts, and part of that's because if we put it in one line, which would make some more sense, it becomes, way too long. So if you look at columns that have family of 2, family of 3, family of 4, family of 5, family of 6. And then below it has family 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Those are all, would be sort of side by side if we were to put this in one chart. Because as you notice from that blue column to the right of that are identical based on the percentages. And again, the idea being here that we're trying to identify a lower rate of tuition for folks who need a little more support because their financial, their income is fairly modest. So just to be simple about this, if we think about a family of 2, so that's basically a parent and one child. If you make, let me read the number off here correctly. We'll read the bottom one says $8,243 per month. That's just shy of $100,000. You would have to pay full tuition. So if you make just shy of, 98,000 something or more, then you pay the full tuition. And then as you go down through those, if your income level is less than that and you're a family of 2, whichever band you're in, you sort of follow it across and you see the price points for those tuitions for the year. And I'll come to that on the right-hand side in just a moment. But if your family's 3 instead of 2, then you look at that column, or if it's 11 instead of 2, you go to the column on that second row. But again, the idea being, depending on the size of your family and the income you have, you get a particular sort of row that you're tracing across. What the blue column does is say what percentage of the annual tuition, that's what annual T is annual tuition that you're potentially paying. And it's based on a $7 per hour sort of maximum rate. We had held it, we were much lower than that and had held it steady for a couple of years. Last year we increased it a little bit, this year we increased it again. 7's not an uncommon per hour rate for preschools and programs like that in this area. And so, the sort of full tuition is based on that $7 per hour times the number of hours per week that your child attends. So we have sort of 3 classifications. You do 2.5 hours a day for 4 days a week. The program runs Monday through Thursday. So that's the 10-hour class. If you go 3.5 hours a day, then that's 14 hours per week, again, a Monday through Thursday. And then the 24-hour is a 6-hour day. It's a pretty long day for, you think that the earliest kids come at 2 years, 9 months, up to age 5 or so. Some go above age 5, but they're younger kids. And again, this is a preschool. This isn't daycare. This is a preschool, so we're trying to be academic in some respects. Now, the 6-hour day kids are probably not they're not doing calculus all day. And I don't mean to make light of it, but it is more than just a childcare circumstance. There's clearly that part of it. And as I said, our kids are a wide range of kids from a whole spectrum of different kinds of abilities and limitations or non-limitations, et cetera. So what we're doing with this is trying to find a fairly, although somewhat complex, but a way to sort of accommodate for folks that have some limitations on their income, and have them be able to access this program a little bit. And we work with people. The idea is that we're making monthly payments, but again, we work with folks to try to collect that tuition in a respectful and thoughtful way. And if circumstances change for families, we consider that. So this isn't we're not trying to make real money here. What we're trying to do with this tuition is offset costs. So we're buying snacks, we're buying materials for the classroom, we're supporting some of the staff that are in the program. So if you think back about our budget, we kind of held off on supporting staff for a couple of years to build our balance. So we were collecting tuition and trying to build our balance and just buying, say, snacks and some of that sort of stuff, and program costs. Now we've built that balance, we're able to support some of the staff that do the work in this. As you might imagine, as any sort of younger child circumstance, the number of staff you need is pretty high relative to the number of kids, but at the same time, charging this little bit of tuition is a helpful way to support the program and provide a rich opportunity for those kids that come to our program. When we get to Superintendent's Update, I have a little other shout out for this program, but anyway, but I'll stop there and see if people have questions about how we divine this overly complex looking chart. Part of it's because this is kind of how the state structures some of their stuff, and we just want to be thoughtful about what families can afford.
Sure. Bridget.
Yep, so first, yeah, I love the preschool. I think the model is excellent, like the inclusion with a peer partner and all that. One thing I would say is we're in the middle of a national childcare shortage. I can remember, I have a senior in high school, everyone knows, but I can remember paying well over, for the same number of hours, like 24, like $1,200 a month or something like that. And I was talking with Matt Holloway, who works in a different district, and he said actually their childcare is a revenue maker. Now, I wouldn't suggest affecting affecting people with on the up to 100%. But one thing I know, I was looking at some really interesting data. There's some parts of our town where the median income is like 38,000, and there's other parts of our town where it's up like over 140. So I'm sort of suggesting or thinking about a row for 150 and a row for 200%, and bringing in a little more dollars. We're not low on dollars, and in my experience, Crocker Farm is a really economically and whatever diverse place. There's a lot of people from all different types of families opting their kids into it or trying to get a spot for it, especially given the economic situation now where people are really trying so hard to find a preschool spot. We might be able to do better with that.
Yeah, I think that's certainly a consideration. I can check with them. It may not be allowed under the program, but hey, if there's opportunity, and there may be families that just have the means and may be willing to support some other families. I don't know off the top of my head whether that's the case or not. But yeah, Amherst, I always often describe Amherst as being a bit bimodal. So we have sort of a bottom and a top and not a lot of middle as far as incomes are concerned. This program does have some very specific requirements about who's attending. So there's a certain number of kids that are peers and a certain number of kids that have needs, and we're trying to meet that. And yeah, would we love to have more kids? We have, sometimes we're limited by the space we have, and sometimes we're limited by the needs that the kids have. And actually, one of the things we did with some of the ARPA funds with the town was to try to do some outreach, because we can't accommodate everybody in these programs. Try to reach out to some other programs and provide supports for kids to access quality preschool elsewhere. So unfortunately, the ARPA monies are going to run out, but hopefully for a couple of years we were able to support in that way. But I appreciate the point. I'll look into whether we can or can't do a sort of higher level for those of greater means. And of course, people are always willing, are always able to donate if they choose to. And they can, and anytime you donate to the school district, you can specify. So you can put a restriction on it. So if you want it to be for the preschool, it can be specifically for the preschool. So there are options for folks that even aren't attending to target, gifts if preschool is something that they really care deeply about. There's lots of other ways to donate too, so I don't want to diminish
Right,
gifts from anybody
right.
for any reason. But anyway.
Jennifer?
So I'm looking at the same chart from last year, and there isn't a 10-hour class column for last year. So I actually don't. Can you explain what the 24, 14, and 10-hour classes are?
Yeah, so the program runs Monday through Thursday, a 10-hour class, which we didn't have. So I think we added that back. So we used to have the sort of 3 tiers, and then we went away from it, and we were like, no, some kids need that. And so 10 hours is 2.5 hours per day, Monday through Thursday. And I'm not 100% certain, but I think they start at 8:30, which would take them to 11 o'clock. And then the 14-hour class is 3.5 hours a day, so that takes them to noon. And then the 24-hour is 6 hours a day, which takes them to, I think it's 2:30, but it might be 1:30, I forget. So that's the idea. So again, Monday through Thursday. Friday is staff spend the time, I'll not make the joke of recuperating, but planning for the coming week and reviewing the work that they've done with the kids. Because, as you know, with kids that age, the changes are profound and rapid with really young kids. So there's a fair amount of work they need to do to prepare and be ready for the next week and strategize and put the program together.
So staff work 5 days a week, and the students, children are there 4 days a week.
Correct.
That's great for the staff. So okay, you mentioned $7 per hour for full tuition. How did that why that number?
And what was it last year? If
It was $650 last year,
Yeah.
according to last year's memo.
Okay.
Yeah, so we had been at I think we'd been at 6 for a while. And so we did a little bit of a comparison to other programs around. I think 7 is still pretty inexpensive relative to some other programs. I didn't look at the sort of cost comparison. Last year I did a little bit. We almost went to 7 last year, and we thought, well, that's too big a jump in 1 year. So we went 50 cents, and again, 50 cents this year. But, it's one of those sort of trade-offs between, generating revenue to support the program and then not pricing people out of the ability to come and thinking about our community and where this fits. And so we do look at peers that offer preschool, what they charge, and take that into consideration as we think about our price point. But we're trying to be kind of in the neighborhood as others like us, but also cognizant of our own community and resources people have for this kind of thing. I think if you were to go, sort of out to a preschool, a commercial preschool, this is fairly inexpensive.
Sure, yeah.
But
I just wanted to note that, the increase from $6.50 to $7 an hour is an increase of about 7.7%. And there are a lot of numbers on here for the state median income numbers, but I just cherry picked a few of them, and it looks like those went up by about 7%. So like the income levels our tuition's going up a little bit higher than the income levels are. Just something to think about as you think about next year's tuition rate, to look at the increase in the state median income. Thanks.
absolutely.
So are the SMI brackets adjusted yearly?
So SMI is, so the EEC, early something education? I forget now.
Element?
In October, they sort of put out the numbers that they use. So they look at the state median income, as of October, and so that's the sort of frame of reference, and they update that every single year, and so we would come back into this chart and change that potentially. Even if we don't change the per hour rate, we might change the thresholds by virtue of the state median income adjusting as well. And again, if most likely we keep in lockstep with that, because then it parallels, other programs that people might be looking at, Head Start programs and other state sponsored or supported programs. So it kind of gives a parallel to those as people think about preschool options for their kids and that sort of thing. So we try to match that up.
Deb?
I got a little lost in the weeds in terms of expenses and income for this program. Does it, what do we wind up, how's it wind up, the tuitions?
to the-
Does it wind up covering the cost of the teachers? You talked about snacks.
So it doesn't cover the cost of the program. It's not a self-supporting program by any stretch, nor do we expect it to. We get support through grants to help support it, and we also just as a school district, it's part of our operational budget. So it's one of the costs we carry, just like a third grade teacher, that kind of thing. So we have, if we go back a bit, sort of pre-pandemic, we traditionally would support a couple of paraprofessionals out of the tuition, plus then some of the incidental and operating costs like snacks and some laundry costs. We occasionally buy equipment specifically for preschoolers that's a little different than the other stuff that you buy. So there's all of those things that are in year to year. Those some of those parallel things like whiteboard markers for classrooms, and so some of it's that kind of stuff, and some of it's stuff that's very specific to preschool. But the expectation is that the tuitions help offset some of the cost. Let's see if I can remember from when we were going through the budget. I think there's about 14 paras in the program. I could be off by 1 or 2, maybe 15. So this supports 2 to 3 of those. So it's very helpful in that regard. We have in total, it's one of those things. It's if you look at the enrollment in this, it grows over the course of the year. We start in the mid 50s, and we finish about 70 or so, plus or minus a little bit over the course of the year. So there's a large number of kids that are in this program as the year progresses. But it's really we don't think of it as a sort of a cost, as a sort of profit center kind of thing, or a break-even circumstance. We're just not going to be able to. We're not going to be able to generate that revenue. Number two, I think it's not really the intent, but if for those of some level of means, it can provide some supports to help offset some of the staff and the materials we need. That's a value add for us.
Yeah, so I was actually going the other way in terms of what would the cost be if we were to expand the program? What would the net cost to the district be? And I don't expect you to know that.
Could
but
be more or less, depending
yeah.
on.
Yeah, so the one way to describe this, like, well, how much tuition do we collect in a year?
Well, if it's,
And I haven't, because we try to hold our, sort of our balance in the revolving
Yeah.
fund, we try to keep fairly steady. There was a time when it was like 35,000 per year, maybe 40,000 per
cost,
year.
overall cost to the district.
Well, no, of revenue from
Oh,
this.
revenue.
The total cost of the program's a lot higher than that.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm not sure where it is now because I haven't looked at the numbers in a while, but just I know from say 5 years ago we were in that $40,000 range as far as revenue that we generate, which helped offset less than 2 staff and some of the other material stuff that we needed. The pandemic sort of put a whole crunch on how these kind of programs and work, and so we're sort of resetting ourselves, and we carried more cost on our appropriated budget over those couple of years with intention to build our balance a little bit, to be prepared for now when we're needing to wean off of ESSER funds and other things.
Thank you.
Why don't we bring this to a vote, I think, so we can move on. You want it, Murphy?
Let's see.
Move to approve the tuitions?
I move to approve the tuition scale as presented.
Second. I'll second it. All right. All in favor, please raise your hands. 5-0, okay, thank you.
Thank you all.
All right, moving along, kindergarten enrollment update. What
So-
can you tell us?
I was hoping to have like a little, grid of stuff. So this is one of those areas where, as much as, and as long as I've worked for the district, is in a particular thing that I had to deal with in the past. So, had a conversation today actually with elementary principals around kindergarten enrollment. And some of it was about, sort of where we have enrollments in which buildings and the numbers and what the implications of that are. We're still in process of thinking through that a little bit, but I think the short story is, as far as the overall level of enrollment at this point in time, we're in okay shape. Let me back up a second. So if we look at our class sizes over the last several years, we've been around 135 in total. And it tends to grow a little bit as we go through the, as the kids get a little older, so our kindergarten's not always quite that big. A little more recently, so like our current kindergarten is about 117. Our current first grade, last year's kindergartners, is a much bigger number, and I'm drawing a blank on that one, but I'm gonna guess it's about it's around that 134, 135 range, so that's more our traditional size. But the current second grade is in that 100, 115 kind of range. So we've had a couple of classes that'll, about 20 smaller than we've been. Class in between that's a little bigger. I think where we sit at this moment in time, our enrollments are roughly, as of today, sort of people who've come in and said, hey, I got a kindergartner, they're gonna come into your school. It's around 100 right now. We will pick up several over the course of the next few months as we get closer to the start of school. There are potentially school choice slots available there. It'll depend on where, and we want to be very judicious about that. One of the things to keep in mind is K1 and 2 are going to be the first classes that are in the K5 school structure. So that's a little different physical structure, and we'll get into this a little bit in the next topic about capacities. But we want to be conscientious of how many students we add as to whether or not they continue to fit even when we build a new building, that sort of thing. But I think there's a lot of open questions at the moment, and it's typical for this time of year about, where are the enrollments, how many kids we have, what are we thinking about as far as number of school choice slots that we might open up or not open up in our kindergarten. But I think as far as the overall enrollment, we're in decent shape. I think we'll probably land by the time school starts. I think we'll be above that sort of 115-ish sort of number. I think, given that we're at 100 right now, I think we'll pick up more than 15 kids in the course of the next few. Whether we'll get up to 135, I doubt that, but we'll probably be, kind of in the right, neighborhood of what we've had over the last few years as far as total number of kindergarten enrollments.
Any questions about this topic? Bridget?
I just had one thought. It may or may not work with the educational model, but we're talking about how would we build to a place where the regional schools might be interested in Comandantes. And I was wondering if it's even possible to open up opportunities for Leverett, Shutesbury, and Pelham to send kindergarteners to Comandantes, so then they'd have a shared interest in seeing the program develop.
Yeah, the short story is
School choice.
internally we fill up Comandantes pretty fast. So I think Katie touched on it just really quickly, but we sort of think in terms of, it's a little more sophisticated than this, but I'll be simplified. So we roughly take two sections, about 20 each. About 20 slots are for native Spanish speakers, and then 20 for non-native Spanish speakers. And so the current circumstance is that on the non-native Spanish speakers, we're full and have a waiting list. On this, on the side with the sort of native Spanish speakers, as you said, I think 3/4 of the way. So, and we typically pick up a few over the course of summer, but then, you know, if there's a couple spots left, that gives us a little latitude right as we get to the start of school to bring some kids that are non-native Spanish speakers into the program. So we're pretty full up, I think. So I think that opening it up to the others, we'd have to really make the thing bigger and kind of add another section. That begs a whole host of other questions. But I think as far as longer term planning, I think it's an interesting question. Whether or not there's opportunity to think in terms of that as an option, for sure.
All right. My only question is this about approximately 100 fairly well distributed across the schools? Or is it
Not as well
particularly
distributed as I'd
lumpy?
like. No, we
Okay.
were talking about that today. It's and it's going to pose some interesting problems to solve, I guess, is the simplest way to not
Okay.
sort of let the cat out of the bag. We're going to have to think about it. We've done this in the past. There have been circumstances in the past where we've had an imbalance in schools as far as kindergarten enrollments, and so we've done things like have kids that would normally go to, one school go to a different school. We have to think about what that means over time, and like how do we sort of integrate them back in. So class sizes can be a little larger as we get older with the kids, and so that gives opportunity for kids to kind of return back to their home school at that point. We look at things like, well, do they have siblings in the building? Do they, there's a whole host of things to consider there. We were, like I said, today was the first conversation we had about this, and right at the moment there's some imbalance, and we've got to sort of see how this plays out a little bit and think about what are the different ways to approach finding the right balance. What are the different ways we might
Make it work.
make it work? Because we like to have the kindergarten about 20 or so or less in a kindergarten class, and it also depends on who those 20 are. So if you've got some kids with known complex profiles of where they are, we want to be conscientious of that as we sort of set class sizes and think about having a good experience for everybody. So those are all factors there. But in the moment we're a little out of balance, and hopefully we'll figure out some ways that can resolve that without too much difficulty for families in particular and kids, and also sort of staff.
All right. How about moving on to enrollment projections more broadly and school capacities?
Yeah. So
Will everyone fit between where are they at?
Yeah, so I was looking at this a little bit. So the interesting thing, so really the question that comes up most exquisitely is will we fit in Fort River? Because that's the one that's got the biggest program with Comandantes in it. We're essentially, for every grade level of that, we're going to have 3 sections for sure. Do we have sort of room over the next couple of years? And the extraordinarily brief answer is yes. So next year will be, we have 3 sections at each grade level and 4 at one grade level. So that's as big as that building is likely to get. So Comandantes is sort of coming along with 3 sections. We sort of manage the size of that. Those upper couple of grades, one of them has 4 sections and one of them has 3. And so as we go over the next couple of years, the number of sections, which is basically how many classrooms, is going to be fixed. It's 22, and that will still fit within the building. It's going to be in the neighborhood of about 360 kids. Wow. It's going to be a full building. We've got to do a little bit of modification this summer. Right now they've got 21 sections, but there's I think the 6th grade is 2 sections. So when those 2 leave and the 3 come in for kindergarten, now you suddenly have an extra section. You need another classroom essentially. So during the pandemic, we remodeled some of our what were called quads, now are called halvesies. That cut down on the total number of classrooms in the building. So there's a room that is currently available to put essentially a single partition wall in and create another space for us. So that's, some of the summer work for Mr. Roy Clark and his staff and others that may help us with putting in that partition to make sure we've got those 22 rooms. But that's the most we'll put into that building, and that's going to hold steady over the next 2 years. So we do have space in those. The other two buildings, Crocker and Wildwood, are in good shape. Crocker is, exclusive of the preschool, it's in that 275 range, and then you add in the preschool that adds another 75. That's right. I could be mistaken on that, but and then Wildwood's sitting in between. So they're all in good shape from a space standpoint. So it will be possible for us to maintain the building at Fort and have space for everybody. And we have to be thoughtful about our sort of choices of school choice and that sort of thing over the next couple of years, but we should be in good shape in that regard.
Okay, all right. I don't see any hands.
That's presuming
so-
sort of things kind of
Right.
trend as they do. If suddenly we
Right.
get, some influx of
100
some sort
families
that
moving.
we weren't
Yeah.
expecting. There is housing coming online in Amherst, and there has been over the last couple of years. So we've seen that. That's one of the things I think about with regard to Wildwood and back to kindergarten enrollment. I mean, I think they renovated some graduate student housing on the university campus, and so we've seen an uptick in Wildwood in some of those families, being new to Wildwood because there's capacity and space on campus for those families that have students, elementary age students. So we'll probably see that again during this summer. So. But again, not anything that's going to overwhelm our buildings, I think. Once we've got the sections in place, even at Fort, the size of those sections are still pretty moderate. They're still within our guidelines of what we want for class size, and that will fit within the spaces we have.
All right,
So-
good. That's good to hear. All right, so superintendent evaluation, we basically heard the plan at the regional meeting last week, so I will just remind you, if you have any suggestions regarding the draft evaluation instrument, to send those ahead of the meeting next Tuesday. So that, next Tuesday on the 28th, we will have to have a joint meeting. Yes, a week from today, with all three committees, the region, Pelham, and Amherst, because all three committees need to vote on the instrument. So again, if you have any suggestions, submit those as soon as possible. I believe Doug is also presenting his artifacts at that
I believe
at
so,
that
yes.
meeting, and then the survey, the instrument will go live, and it'll be due June 4th. I get to do the summative assessment. I'm not going to assign that to anybody. I should learn how to do it, but I do hope that Jennifer and Irv will be available to help me out since they've been through this and I have not. And then we will be voting on the summative assessment as the elementary district, either at our, I'm not sure which is which, either on June 14th or June 25th. One of those might be a joint, again, another joint meeting. So that's to be determined, I think. Okay, so that's all I wanted to say about that. Chair's update, I posted, did you raise your hand, Doug? No, okay, thought I saw. I posted just a couple very brief updates. I would like to announce what was not public at the time that I posted that chair's update, that we do have a new superintendent starting July 1st, Dr. Xiomara Herman. That is, the negotiations have successfully concluded, and we are thrilled, very excited that she'll be joining us, and I'm sure Doug is very pleased too. And I have no more updates than what I just said and what I posted to the agenda. And there was one school committee member update from Deb regarding the elementary school building committee. Yes, Jennifer?
I have a question about your chair's update,
Oh,
Sarah. In your document, you said that Vice Chair Irv Rhodes and you had a discussion with
Oh, yes.
Lynn Griesmer about a draft proposal from the town manager to form a committee charged with developing financial stability for ARPS. But do you mean financial stability for Amherst, the elementary district, or do you mean, because if, I
They
don't
mean all
understand.
of it. They mean all of it.
But when,
Yeah. So
Wouldn't the-
I did say ARPS, but I meant including Amherst Elementary Schools. So she contacted us to talk about that part of it. And I assume it's also going to the region.
so has there been a proposal from Mr. Bockelman?
There was a
'Cause you-
draft memo that he sent to Lynn, and she wanted our thoughts on it, but where it stands, I do not know.
I assume that that memo, which will be more than memo, will come up if it next Monday at the council meeting. I assume that that's what will happen.
Do we get to see the memo?
At some point, yes, I
Have you
would.
seen the memo?
We saw the first draft and responded to it.
That would be great if you could share it with us.
Okay.
Thank you.
Actually, it was.
It was what?
Actually, not the entire memo, but the town manager's thoughts on what he was going to be presenting to the council. I shared.
Okay. Well, if you could share the memo in its entirety, that would be great.
Sure. Yeah, and I expect it will change. The town manager said in his budget that he presented to town council that he would, I think, commit to, starting a committee to do this work. So he's taken that first step. Right?
This
Yeah.
is, I think it's regional business, so I don't want to.
No, it isn't.
too
It isn't.
far, or-
It isn't only because the town is concerned about the trends, both for the financial trends, both for the regional schools and the Amherst Elementary District. So, yes.
Because it was just the regional piece.
No,
that
it
I'm
wasn't.
wondering.
We didn't talk
No,
about the
yeah.
No, we were
So-
just sharing, yeah.
We're just miscommunicating. I'm saying for the regional piece, I think, I just wonder about what the process for the regional piece would look like because, it would seem like then that would be a discussion for Sarah Bess and William, and then, it's Amherst Town Council, so do we bring in people from all the other towns, and then are we basically having a four towns meeting?
Right.
So,
very
I'm
good
just
question.
curious,
Right,
right?
so I would
what I
say
mean.
save all those thoughts because we'll
certainly.
probably, they will, probably come to that, yeah.
Right, thank you.
Okay. Let's see. So, I think I said that Deb had given an update on the elementary school building project, which sounds like all good news. And nobody else had any, I didn't. You had, you emailed us. No, it wasn't a committee update, never mind, I'm sorry, never mind. Okay.
Yes, I don't remember if I shared out the Day on the Hill, which I attended as part of the MASC advocacy in Boston. Have I? I mean, I shared it at
No,
the
if it
regional
was,
level.
okay, so,
But, yeah.
Go ahead.
I went and talked to various, talked to various legislators or their chiefs of staff and have had follow-up conversations with other legislators, basically as part of a sort of a group of people, two groups of people in Western Massachusetts trying to look at the ways in which Western Mass schools are struggling financially based on the kind of four big things that the state is not necessarily providing us with the resources to fulfill our obligations to our students.
thank you. Okay, superintendent's update.
All right, so a couple of things. Some of them are just logistical. So one thing I'll remind everybody is that next Monday is Memorial Day, and so there's not school on Monday. But that also impacts our posting of the meeting on Tuesday, so we'll be making sure to get that posted to Thursday, because the 48-hour lead time is necessary. But nonetheless, there's just, there is that holiday coming up. Also, I will share, speaking of holidays, that we are celebrating Juneteenth. So with school getting out, part of the reason it's on the 20th is because on the 19th, we will not be in school that day. So we'll go Monday, Tuesday, be off Wednesday, come back on Thursday. And so, we look forward to that and the opportunities that presents to us as far as that's concerned. Of course, as I just noted, the last day of school is 6:20. I'll give another little update on construction. I was in a different meeting today where we do a little check-in on the nitty-gritty of construction. So where we sit at the moment with the construction is we're really making tremendous progress on what they call the early site plan or the early site work. Whether you know this or not, but there's a fair amount of preparatory work that's going on at Fort River to prepare for the building being built on that site, and some of it's about making sure it's ready for the geothermal work that's going to go in, but also given its proximity to wetlands, we want to be careful about that. So there's a tremendous amount of earthwork that's happened to date. They finished they call them RAPs. It's Ram something piers. I forget what the A is. Anyway, basically they're trying to create highly compacted earthen piers that the building will be setting on, and it prevents settling and that sort of thing. What they're doing currently, which seems sort of almost amusing in a way, is they're piling dirt on top of that to
It's preloading.
yeah, to simulate the weight of the building. So you're gonna put a bunch of dirt on top of what they've been working on. Then it's gotta sit for like 3 months. And then when they get into the construction phase, which will be bid out over the course of the summer, and then it'll start and all that sort of stuff, that dirt becomes some of the additional soil that ends up being around the building. But in the short term, it's sitting on sort of top of this pile. And they're in the process of bringing in some unimaginable number of truckloads of dirt. So if you see sort of piles of dirt starting to show up at Fort River, that's what's going on. And it really, and the thing is, they're ahead of schedule. They may finish right at the end of June, beginning of July, and then it'll all just sit there for a while and look like nothing's happening because it's settling and making sure that everything is behaving as expected. And during that time, while we're waiting for that, will be when the bidding on the general contractor for the building construction and all of the subcontractors and all that stuff is going to be taking place, with the expectation that that construction will be getting underway this late summer, fall timeframe. So that's all currently ahead of schedule, which is great news, and they've not run into complications. I think the big things that are remaining is the comfort station bathrooms still need to be demolished. There's a pipe underneath that needs removal with some additional care. That's the big sort of construction looking kind of thing. The rest of it's going to be piling a bunch of dirt in a big pile. Yeah.
When are bids expected to go out?
Oh, sure. Ask the good questions. I think it's in July. I think the opening of they sort of open the process, and then there's a period of time, and I want to say it's like 4 or 6 weeks where they collect bids from people. But I think the bid opening, like where we like do awarding and stuff, I think is in early August. But if you could really get to that quickly, that'd be great. At the meeting I was talking to today, they were talking a little bit about qualified bidders, and so there's some of that process sort of preliminary to the bids formally being ready to be accepted that's going on as we speak, and trying to get number and good group of qualified general contractors and subcontractors that are going to participate in this project. So some of that preliminary stuff's happening.
All right, so it's a question I asked myself the other day. What if, like the library, it comes in
I can answer that.
way, like 20% above? What is
So,
that?
so we kind of have good news on that front.
Yeah.
So in the process of getting ready to put this out for bid, as part of the process, we have estimators that essentially are doing a bid without doing a bid. And right now, their estimates, and they're pretty conservative folks, are under what's I don't want to say what's allowed, but sort of what's been budgeted. So we're about 2.5 million right now under. The reality will be different once we actually do the bids. If it were a case where the bids come in over, I believe what we do is go into the sort of value engineering. They've done some of that already to sort of shrink the project. We come back to some questions about what we might have or not have in the project. At our last meeting, and I think Deb hinted at this in her note, you know, we added back some things that we felt we had capacity for. But again, and that was one of the topics, one of the people sort of raised that question. It's like, well, we want to be a little cautious about this because if we, you know, kind of put back too much stuff and then suddenly we're in a tough circumstance because we have to kind of reverse ourselves. But I think I'll let,
You know, cautionary tale, I mean.
Right.
The
Yeah,
library
no-
had estimators also.
So Doug, this number here, I think, so there's a construction contingency of 4 million, and I think we get to add another 2.5 million onto that. So right now, they have a contingency of 6.5 million.
yeah, in a
Is that-
sense, that's one way to think of it for sure. So there's a, you know, whenever you do these kind of things, and we'll see this in other projects as well, there's a baseline contingency, and as you get closer to fully designed and ready to bid, the contingency shrinks. There's always some in there, but just to talk about a different project in a different district, you know, we started at a 20% contingency. We're now at about a 15% contingency. As we get further along, it'll get down smaller, but there'll always be some, you know, built-in contingency for, you know, stuff that happens that we can't anticipate. Right now, that number's at about 4 million, but, you know, separate from that, in just analyzing sort of, you know, recent bids and process, you know, the sort of raw bid of the direct construction stuff, we're still under original estimates and original resources. So that's a good position to be in. And I think, you know, your point's well taken because, you know, Amherst has certainly experienced a slightly different scenario really recently. So, yeah.
Yeah, you know, I was on the building committee before, and the cost of the building rises to meet the amount of contingency that exists.
That's right.
So
Yeah, exactly.
the part I found heartening beyond the numbers was when the committee spoke about how well documented and thorough and complete and exceptionally, I don't know, they used a term, exceptionally well.
Justified.
Just the sense of both architects on the committee. I mean, the John Salvin and
Bruce?
the British guy, yeah.
Cool.
Was just speaking volumes about how strong a document it was, which gave you a lot of confidence that there would be no surprises.
And we're still keeping our fingers crossed.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, given that I've been through
Yeah.
this and other construction projects.
Yeah. You know,
And I don't, it's like when the architects, et cetera, and they're so sure, and all of a sudden you're blown out of the water.
Yeah.
well,
I'm really hopeful we don't run into that because more than anything, what that would probably do is create delay. And that's where we'd really, something we also don't want because we'd have to go back and refine some things and you know, work to get within budget we have. So yeah, we don't want to be there. And that's part of the, you know, I think it's part of the process, you know, and given how volatile construction has been over the last couple of years, it's really harder to have strong confidence in where everything is. So we'll all be anxiously awaiting how that's proceeding.
be at the
So
bid let us know when the bid opening.
yeah,
is.
we definitely will. So I did have a couple other quick
yeah.
things to mention to you. I just want to mention around school, the topic of school choice. We are accepting applications until the 27th. Make sure I got that date right. Yeah, the 27th of June. The lottery will be on the 28th. We'll probably have a similar number of seats that we usually have in the elementary schools. I asked some folks and looked at some data. Kind of over the last few years, we've had between 20 and 30 total seats. Something on that order is probably about what we'll have. I don't want to, be more formal at this point than that. So we'll have some opportunities for folks to participate in school choice with us. The website has dates from last year, but the link to the form to fill out to register is up to date, and it has the up-to-date dates on it. So the 27th of June is when the applications need to be in. The 28th is when the lottery will happen. They'll notify people the next week, which basically is the week of Monday's the 1st, 3rd is Wednesday, 4th is Thursday. So that week we'll try to be reaching out to folks after we do that lottery process for school choice. So I just wanted to mention those dates, partly because if you go to the school choice part of our website, we just didn't change the year, and it's very close, but it's not exactly right as far as month and day. But it's late June. It's the 27th for application, 28th for the lottery. So I did want to mention that. And then one other thing I wanted to mention, and since we were talking about preschool earlier, and I'm going to ask Ms. Westmoreland to send the fuller link to you. You may have seen this, but I wanted to explicitly read part of this. The Amherst Early Education Center, also known as our preschool, at Crocker Farm, has been awarded the Welcoming Schools Seal of Excellence by the Human Rights Campaign Foundation. This prestigious recognition is bestowed on schools that prove themselves to be exemplary in implementing the HRC Welcoming Schools approach. The presentation of the Seal of Excellence will take place at Crocker Farm on June 12th at 2:30 p.m. And the rest of the narrative that Ms. Westmoreland shared with me is a little more about what that entails to be a welcoming school and who the Human Rights Campaign Foundation are. So I'll ask them to share, ask her to share that with you. So nonetheless, that's a nice accolade for the Crocker Farm School. I know that, and the preschool particularly, they made efforts to sort of meet the qualifications. They've made, by virtue of professional development and training and efforts, they've done that with intention to be a welcoming school, and they're being recognized for it. A second thing I'll mention is the Wildwood Multicultural Night will be held this Thursday, May 23rd, from 5:30 to 7:30, and the Fort River Multicultural Night is also Thursday from 6 to 8. So your ability to sort of swing by two different parts of town and see the multicultural nights at the two schools will be Thursday evening. So I want to make sure to mention that so people have that on their calendars if they want to see something. And I'm certain that those will be delightful events. The kind of things our kids do and our adults do with those kids is pretty phenomenal. And I think that was the main things I wanted to share with you tonight with regard to my update.
Bridget? Oh, sorry. Oh, go ahead,
Jen-
Bridget.
Jen, go ahead. Just really quickly, in my other hat on the equity committee, we were going to invite the person from the preschool who did the welcoming schools approach to talk about how we might bring it to the middle and high school, but that leads me to think about how, if the person who's done this might be able to share or do a PD or bring our other elementary schools on board with this approach as well.
Yes, I think she's already sort of made that offer to help share what they've learned and what they did and how they went about it with the others. But I'll definitely reach out and talk to her about that as well.
And I think CPAC, the Special Education Parent Advisory Council, is also very interested in, if I'm remembering correctly, extending that program or that welcome more fully to the kids in the special education program. Yeah. Jennifer, did you? Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Doug, for confirming that June 20th is the last day of school. I feel like I have seen, in past years, I've seen the last day of school stated on the ARP's homepage. That would be helpful because I think I had to go back and count how many snow days we've had, which was not easy to do. So that would be a great thing to add to the homepage, and especially to add that the 19th is a holiday and the 20th will be the last day of school. I think people will be confused about that.
Yeah, I was thinking we had, but maybe we haven't made it as prominent as it needs to be.
Great. Thanks.
Okay, future agendas, I'll let you know what's on the draft agenda for June. Well, at some point in June, at one or another meeting, we will be voting on the summative assessment for the interim superintendent. We will hear about summer plans and programs, the elementary level. We'll talk about transitioning and onboarding of the new superintendent and what this committee might want to do in the way of welcoming Dr. Herman, community events or family, and we'll figure that out. But you could start thinking about what might be nice to do. We'll get an update on the school choice slots. We will probably have to vote on some budget transfers and adjustments for this current fiscal year to turn all those red boxes that we see green again, remember? Well, at least when we get the quarterly updates and some lines are over budget, money has to be moved into those accounts. So Doug, the business office will prepare a list of the necessary adjustments for us to vote on. And then possibly we will also review or hear about, I don't think we need to vote anything, but the audits of the 2 previous fiscal years, fiscal year 22 and 23. So that sounds like a pretty full agenda. But if there's anything else you want us to do, let me know. Jennifer?
Not for June, but just for
Yeah.
you, Sarah, for the future. I had thought that today's enrollment projections and school capacities was going to be even further out. I was going to talk about the new school building. Because I think it's not too soon to at least start talking about and thinking about that, because we're going to have to, I assume, redistrict, and that's something we in the elementary, that's something we haven't done in a long time, and I don't even know how to do that. So I think it's not too soon to start having that conversation, and maybe for future agenda.
Yeah. No, it's obviously concern. I suppose it's the farther away in time you are, the harder it is to know if there's a problem or how to solve it. But it's definitely something and if there's anything that you can tell us, not tonight, but or maybe the new superintendent will tell us.
One thing I'll offer for you guys to consider, and this came up when we closed Marks Meadow School, one of the criteria that the school committee felt strongly about as far as redistricting criteria was to try to balance the socioeconomics of the buildings. We were able to do that, and that held fairly steady for quite some time. It's only been in the last couple of years that's gone a little out of balance, and part of that's because we've moved the district program of Comandantes in, and that shifts things a little bit. So things like that, criteria you're thinking about like that. The other thing I will just say, just in talking about sort of thinking about, and pardon the expression, 3 buildings to 2, is thinking about some aspects of that, for sure. I actually had a conversation today with some folks about the enrollment projections and thinking about sort of how many kids we're going to have, what do we think is going to happen relative to total kids we have. So I think there's a few intersecting pieces there to keep in mind. So appreciate the question.
Warrant report. Jen, go ahead.
I have several to many. I have many. I, Jennifer Stout, authorized by my signature payroll in the amount of $2,297.61 on May 1st. I, Jennifer Stout, authorized by my signature payroll in the amount of $788,187.08, also dated May 1st. I, Jennifer Stout, authorized by my signature payables in the amount of $86,612.95 for the warrant dated May 3rd. This includes general fund expenses of $46,859.34, revolving fund expenses of $22,036.05, grant fund expenses of $10,641.54, and capital fund expenses of $7,076.02. Finally, I authorize payroll in the amount of $86,612.95 dated May 3rd. I, Jennifer Shaw, authorize by my signature payroll in the amount of $5,394.39 dated May 8th. Okay. I, Jennifer Shaw, authorize by my signature payroll in the amount of $783,259.72 dated May 15th. I, Jennifer Shaw, authorize by my signature to the Crocker Farm Student Activities Transfer Request in the amount of $1,436 for the transfer dated May 15th. I, Jennifer Shaw, authorized by my signature to the Fort River Student Activities Transfer Request in the amount of $1,737.84 for the transfer dated May 17th. Last one. I, Jennifer Shaw, authorized by my signature payables in the amount of $224,698.51 for the warrant dated May 17th, 2024. This includes general fund expenses of $76,001.53, revolving fund expenses of $16,733.86, grant fund expenses of $53,835.30, and capital fund expenses of $78,127.82. Finally, and then I'm done.
Okay. All right, thank you. And apparently there were no gifts.
There are.
on the oh, what?
Oh, no, sorry, I misread.
Okay. So we are at the end of the meeting. I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All right, all in favor? Thank you, we are adjourned.